because Arjuna is having a crisis of purpose. First chapter is all about Arjuna's crisis and the lack of purpose, the lack of direction, his search for his dharma. Does anybody know what dharma means?
Keep losing them. Faces.
What's dharma? That's the first word of Bhagavad Gita.
Love that. Yeah. The search of Arjuna happens in the midst of our battlefield. Yeah.
So dharma means our true essential nature. And until we find that, we are always struggling. Dharma is our purpose also. What is the real purpose of our real self?
It's kind of like someone gets a job and they go into the workplace and they don't know what they're supposed to do. Like they don't know what their title is, who they really are, what is the job description, and they're just looking around. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do?
They just give people, hey, you go and sit there, and now what?
And now what? So anyways, today what we'll talk about, and actually we can maybe jump into it because we have quite a presentation.
Yeah.
What we're going to talk about is the reason why we struggle with understanding what our dharma is, because we don't really even know who we are, because our job is actually connected to our identity. And right now we're a little divided over our identity. Who are we really? And once we know who we are, then, dharma follows. Now we're a little divided over our identity. Who are we? Sorry.
Oh.
And it's coming from
I
someone
think
else.
mute, you can mute. I'm going to mute you all. Sorry for doing that. Sounds horrible to say that. I'll bring up the slokas.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I was just saying that
Oh, the mic does not sound on or connected. Can you guys hear us okay?
no, maybe not. Let's see. Let's just check which microphone
Yes,
is on.
we can hear us. You.
Say that again.
We can
Yes.
hear you.
Oh, you can hear us. Okay.
I can hear you.
Yeah,
All right. So yeah, so that's kind of what's happening. The first chapter, we talked about the yoga of lamentation. We talked about how Arjuna is standing here on this most important battle of his life, and he breaks down. He has a breakdown where he starts to think about why he needs to do what he is called to do, and he cannot find any real reason. He finds enough reasons why he should not be doing it, and he presents all those reasons. And we divided those reasons into 5 main categories. And it was compassion, karma, fear of sinful reactions, family, society breaking down, and loss of personal happiness, and all of these different reasons that Arjuna gives out. And yet he's feeling confused because he's being pulled in these 2 different directions, where on the one hand he has a nagging sense that something is not right in his arguments, and at the same time he cannot really understand what's wrong, because his heart is telling him that no, actually I should just retire into the forest and just live a life of begging.
So without knowing who we are in any crisis situation or difficult situation, the mind just wants to kind of run away from that situation. That's what is happening to Arjuna. So because of a lack of proper understanding of who he is forced into this crisis. And luckily for Arjuna, what happens is he has a good guide right next to him. So so today we'll go over what is identity, who we are, and we'll discuss first the verses from the Bhagavad Gita which talk about who we are, and then we'll jump into our presentation. So Krishna, what happens is Arjuna kind of accepts Krishna as his teacher, as spiritual guide, and asks Krishna that please tell me what is best for me. So instead of Krishna telling him a solution, Krishna takes him back to the drawing board and say, hey Arjuna, you have to first understand who you are before you can understand the solution. So this is what we are going to read now. So chapter 2.
O descendant of Bharata, at that time, Krishna, smiling in the midst of both the armies, spoke the following words to the grief-stricken Arjuna.
Text 11. The Supreme Personality of God had said, while speaking learned words, you are mourning for what is not worthy of grief. Those who are wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. So Krishna starts with a kind of chastisement of Arjuna that, hey, you've been whatever you've been speaking doesn't really make any sense. You really need to know who you are.
Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So this is a really important point, because sometimes people think that at the point of liberation, one will cease to exist. But here actually Krishna is right off saying that eternality means that, each one of us, we've always existed, and in the future will continue to exist.
And then also that we are always an individual. Our individuality is never lost. Text 13. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this is the core of the Bhagavad Gita philosophy, that Krishna is saying that, hey, embodied soul means the soul is separate from the body. That's why we call it embodied soul. And the soul is different from the body. Soul has nothing to do with this body. This is the prime teaching of the Bhagavad Gita. And we'll explore these concepts more in our presentation.
O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O sky and O Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. It's kind of interesting. I always find this very interesting. That right after saying that, well, we're really not this body, Arjuna, and one should not get bewildered by such a change. He talks about the quality of tolerance, because even though we are not this body, but we have to tolerate this body. We have to tolerate the changes that come with the body. That continuous change from one phase of life to the next phase of life is like a mini death, right? And so one has to learn how to tolerate each of those changes,
and also tolerate happiness.
Yeah, and also tolerate.
Text 15. O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. So this is the platform of the soul, that the soul is not disturbed. And the only way we can reach this stage is by realizing that we are not a body, we are a soul.
Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both.
So by the way, this section that Krishna is speaking is called Sankhya Yoga, which means a thorough analysis of matter and spirit, understanding the difference between matter and spirit, understanding the difference between body and soul. This is called Sankhya Yoga, Sanskrit.
That which pervades the entire body, we should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul.
So we'll jump to text 20. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. This is like another very fundamental verse of Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is saying sometimes we always want to find out the timeline or the beginning point of something. And Krishna is saying the soul does not have a beginning, just like God does not have a beginning. Because the soul is the eternal part of God. So therefore,
the soul was never created.
It was never created.
Yeah, the soul was never created. Actually, in the Vedic paradigm, the word that is used is emanation. Just like the sunshine is an emanation from the sun. So the soul is also an emanation from the Supreme Sun. And there is never a point at which the soul actually got created.
Yeah.
As a person puts on new garments, this is text 22. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones.
That is the verse that explains reincarnation, that the body, the relationship between body and soul is similar to the relationship that we have with our clothes. We change our clothes every day. Similarly, the soul also changes body. And that's even happening within this life. Krishna is going to describe some of the qualities of the soul. He's going to speak in the negative because we don't have an experience of the soul. We don't see souls around. We just see bodies around. So how do we understand something that is so foreign to us? So first, Krishna is going to describe in the negative that it is not this, it is not this, it is not this. Text 23. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind. So these are the four primary elements of nature. And Krishna is saying that none of these elements can touch the soul. It's just, or you can look at the soul with any of these instruments.
This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same. So these are some of the other qualities of the soul, that it is everlasting, present everywhere. It can be present in any situation. It's not affected by the material condition, and we'll see some evidence of that in our presentation. I think you should read the amazing verse. So text 29, finally Krishna says so many things, and then finally this is what he concludes. Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing.
while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all. So this is the amazing nature of
him
this.
or her, actually.
Him or
Soul
her.
is actually considered to be feminine
Yeah.
in nature. She's Prakriti, but still, the point being that the soul is actually always amazing. So what does that mean? That means that I am amazing and you are amazing. Each one of us is amazing.
If God is saying that every soul is amazing, even the soul in the ant and a blade of grass is amazing. So every soul is amazing.
I guess the other thing I was thinking when we use the word amazing means that something that even surprises someone. What is amazing? Amazing is something that can actually surprise you.
And beyond our conceptions, beyond our pre-existing conditions, conceptions, and it is, and it is Krishna finds the soul amazing. Krishna is all amazing, but even Krishna finds the soul is amazing. So we can see the potential of the soul. It's
very unique.
Yeah. And then there's some other verses, since we are doing a thematic study of the Bhagavad Gita, so we picked verses about the soul from different parts of the Bhagavad Gita, because Bhagavad Gita has a spiral way of teaching us something.
This is an excellent verse.
Text 42, another very primary verse of the Bhagavad Gita from chapter 3. The working senses are superior to dull matter. The mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And the soul is even higher than the intelligence. So this is kind of Krishna's giving the hierarchy of things. So
actually, there's a beautiful slide that then we can explain this now.
Slide for this.
Yeah, the chariot.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have a slide for this, but just to understand. And chapter 30 also talks a lot about the soul. In text 30, Krishna says, one who can see that all activities are performed by the body, which is created of material nature, and sees that the self does nothing, actually sees. So relationship between the work and the soul. The soul is actually just sitting. Okay. Just one verse I wanted to bring. Text 34. This kind of explains that the quality of the soul and consciousness. O son of Bharata, as the sun alone illuminates all this universe, so does the living entity, one within the body, illuminate the entire body by consciousness. So this is the quality of the soul is consciousness.
Just like the sun is known by its sunshine.
Yeah.
So same way the soul's presence is known by consciousness.
So the consciousness comes from the soul, as opposed to consciousness coming from the body or the mind or the brain. Text 15. These are again very important questions. Krishna answers about where the soul comes from. Text 7. The living entities in this conditioned world are my eternal fragmental parts. Due to conditioned life, they are struggling very hard with the six senses, which include the mind. So this is where Krishna answers that what is the soul? He says the soul is an eternal part of God, the eternal part of me. And therefore, we are always connected. There is no disconnection between us and God. Text 8.
This is an excellent verse again, which talks about reincarnation, which we'll talk about in our presentation. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus, he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another. Sometimes we wonder about what our past life might have been. This verse indicates that, just like by smelling the aroma in a breeze, one gets a sense of where that breeze has come from, whether it has come over a rose garden or whether a garbage dump. But at the same time, by seeing the fragrance of our consciousness, we can understand in our last life what our experiences would have been.
And even from day to day or year to year, we can see this journey. Our consciousness is affected by what we have done in the past. Text 9. The living entity thus taking another gross body obtains a certain type of ear, eye, tongue, nose, and sense of touch, which are grouped about the mind. He thus enjoys a particular set of sense objects. So we can see even a pig is very happy rolling in the mud and eating stool, because that's the enjoyment that the pig is destined for.
And so each one of us, we have our own enjoyments based on our body.
Yeah. Text 10. The foolish cannot understand how a living entity can quit his body, nor can they understand what sort of body he enjoys under the spell of the modes of nature. But one whose eyes are trained in knowledge can see all this. So this is Krishna's purpose, is to kind of show us give us this knowledge, train our eyes so we can see who we are, who others are, and what is happening around us. So these are the main verses on this topic, identity. And now we'll jump into our presentation to explain what Krishna has talked about.
Oh, sorry. So that word is Sankhya Yoga.
Yeah.
We can maybe just type
Let me
that.
just type it.
Aditi, if you are there, and maybe you can just
Ashutosh.
Ashutosh,
No.
Anshul is there. Yeah, so
Sankhya.
it's not Sankhya, it's N Sankhya.
Oh, sorry. SANKHY. Sankhya. Thank you. So where is the presentation session?
So we jump into this presentation now on the self, which is actually the ABC of spiritual life. Sometimes, we talk about, we say that, I am spiritual, or, I consider myself to be a spiritualist. And so, so what that means, or someone says, I'm a materialist. So this is like the most basic fundamental understanding. What is a spiritualist and what is a materialist? A spiritualist is someone who understands the spirit, understands what is soul, what is consciousness, and the materialist thinks that the whole world is simply made up of the 5 material elements, which are temporary and destructible. So this is actually, because sometimes we just tend to use that in terms of our enjoyment, or our materialistic mindset. But what does it mean to have a materialistic mindset, and what does it mean to have a spiritual mindset? Spiritual mindset means understanding who am I in relationship.
And then we can live our life to the fullest, because without understanding who we are living a tiny fraction of the real life. So this knowledge is necessary not just for spiritual life, but it's necessary for a good material life as well. Who am I? So we're going to cover a case of too many identities, identity crisis. Am I the body, the mind, or something else? The 3 types of self. And then we'll also talk about how do I, because I can't see the soul, so how can I know for sure? Because many people don't believe there is a soul. So we will discuss some common sense evidences of soul from our secular world.
And these are not strictly evidence, but just kind of they point towards reality.
Yeah, they point towards that reality. And what is a soul? I mean, we're talking about soul. What are the different qualities of the soul? And then we'll also touch on the topic of reincarnation, because this is what we're going through.
So this is actually, where we are right now. We have all these labels that we walk around with. As soon as a person is born, then, we get, this name tag gets slapped on us, and you're like, okay, this is your name, right? And yeah, whatever, parents just decide. And then with that name comes a host of other labels, that I am, whatever my last name is, whichever country I live in, whatever, community I'm from, a gender.
I guess people need at least 3 names to identify themselves. First name, middle name, and last name.
Yeah.
Which one is us?
Yeah, which one is us? And then as we keep going through life, basically our life is basically collecting more and more labels.
And then we have these labels simultaneously, like based on our age, based on our profession, based on our ideology, right? I am an environmentalist. I am a capitalist.
Yeah. So many labels we collect, right?
Yeah.
But and actually, I was just thinking that another reason why this knowledge is really, really important is because so many of our fights and quarrels are over these labels, right? And we just, we fight like, okay, and right now there's a war going on.
Yeah.
It's like there's just one thin line separating the 2 countries.
And there is no line. On the land, there is no line.
And on the land, there's no line, but yet we fight because we are convinced in our head that this is who I am. I'm an Indian. I'm an American. I'm Russian. I'm this and that, and then we fight over that. And then unfortunately, even religion becomes a label, right? People fight over religions. I'm a Hindu. I'm a Muslim. I'm a Christian. I'm a this. I'm a that. And these are all labels, or these are all designations. In Sanskrit, it's called upadhis. It has nothing to do with the reality of the self. Because the self is actually none of those. And that's something we're going to explore right now.
All these labels, they don't mean anything to the soul.
People fight over the fact that, one is of this group and one is of that group, men fighting against the women fighting against the men. And we're continuously, in this pool of like trying to hold on tight to those labels. And the reality is that all of these labels are taken away.
Because what happens is as soon as we acquire a label, then there comes a set of rights that we okay, because I am a man or a woman or whatever, I have a certain rights. And then we start fighting, and then we have so many identities, and we start fighting for all those rights. And some of those rights conflict with each other. And it creates a big mess for the soul, because soul is none of these.
Soul is just being dragged around.
just an example we discussed in the last.
Yeah, so it's just a recap of a analogy, again, a story that we used last time, where an eaglet falls in the egg of an eagle falls into the nest of a hen, and they all hatch together, and the eaglet grows up thinking that he's actually a chicken, and his only dharma is really to hop on the ground and
Back on the
yeah,
grains.
on little grains. But he has a natural desire. He knows that something is amiss, and he has a natural desire to fly in the sky. So this is kind of where we are right now, so that we are kind of stuck in these labels, but we do understand, we have a nagging sense that I am actually more than all of these labels.
And this is what is driving us, right? We are all here because we know that there's something beyond all this.
Yeah.
We are looking for peace and the true peace and happiness, knowing that it is not here.
Yeah. And also this is actually the reason why so much fear is generated within us, right? Because we know that those labels are under constant threat of extinction or constant threat of somehow being taken away from us.
Each of these labels are being taken away.
Yeah, I mean, what will happen to me if I lose my job? What will happen to me if I'm no longer this or I'm no longer that? And then that creates a lot of anger and a lot of stress within us, a lot of fear within us. But to know that actually I am none of these, right? So let's.
Yeah, so this to understand that how we are not this body, we are not these labels, because this was an example used by Thesis. So you can think of this ship that is, say, very old ship that has been working hard, and then the owners of the ship, they realize that, hey, this ship is not good anymore. I need to renovate it. So what if this is a thought exercise? Say, let's assume that the ship has so many planks, so somebody starts taking away one plank at a time and replacing the old plank with a new one. And as you can see on the top, slowly the ship is being transformed from old to new. So at a starting point, it was ship A, which was the old battered ship. And then they replaced one plank at a time. And then it ends up with ship B. And the owner says, okay, my ship is renovated. This is my new version of my ship. What if they were saving all those old planks, and using those old planks, they just constructed another ship, which is ship C. So now, which one is the original ship? How would you answer that question? And the reason this is brought up is because this is exactly the same thing that is happening with us. The ship has gone through an identity change, but still the old identity lingers on in terms of its bits and parts. So who's the real me? That is the question. Who's the real me?
Which is the real ship.
Yeah.
So here, the Bhagavad Gita actually, comes in straight. Actually, it's interesting. That's the starting point of the Bhagavad Gita. It says, well, we are not the body, but we have a body. We possess a body, but we're not the body. Just like another example that is sometimes used to illustrate this is that I have a car, but I'm not the car. I sit in the car and I drive the car, but I am not the car.
If somebody started saying they are the car, if somebody started saying, what is your name? And then they say, answer, 1213 Newberry Street, apartment C. And say, are you crazy? And so we start identifying ourselves with the apartment or with the car, then people will say we are crazy. But this is exactly what we are doing. We are identifying ourselves with this body.
Which is just a vehicle.
Which is just a vehicle. And this is what Krishna says in the text 13 of second chapter, that as the soul passes from boyhood to youth to old age, similarly the soul passes on to the next life. And a sober person is not bewildered by such a change.
Just a quick a little side note here. As we are speaking, you may have so many thoughts, maybe even questions or comments or reflections. Please use the chat box.
Yeah.
And just, write down your thoughts, because that will help us, if you have time in the end, or even maybe in our Q&A session, for us to be able to engage in these discussions.
So this is an interesting video of how the body changes and how we still identify the person as that same person. Why is that? Thomas Kelly. He has gone through so many changes of body, even in this life. Who's the real one?
But the interesting thing is the Bhagavad Gita, kind of suggests, and we see that in our own experience, that, when you see old pictures, sometimes you sit down with family albums and you see yourself as like a 5-year-old or a 20-year-old, you go, oh, that's me, right? But there's nothing in that picture that, sometimes people can't even make the connection. They're like, really, that's you?
Yeah, people bring out the high school pictures, right? And then they say,
they're
okay, can you spot this celebrity in
Yeah.
this picture? And people are having a hard time. So, but the person is there. So who's the real me? And that's the question to ask, because without understanding, and the reason this confusion happens is because we know we have a sense that who we are, but at the same time, we identify with the
We
body.
get caught up.
Yeah.
We get caught up with the body and the identity with that. And yet intuitively we know, because we look back at those old pictures and we say, that's me. So which me? The body is changed. And modern science also says that every 7 years, all the cells in the body are completely changed. So that body is no longer there, but yet we have a sense of continuum. So that sense of continuum actually comes from this intuitive understanding that I'm more than all those changes.
So we talked about how the body is covering the soul, but Bhagavad Gita says that that's not complete knowledge. There, actually, the soul has a body. Soul actually has two types of body. So the first type of bodies is what we see, the gross body. It's called the gross body, and which is made of these 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. These are the 5 elements that constitute our body, gross body. But we also have a subtle body, which is the inner body, we can say that. And that inner body, Krishna says, is made up of mind, intelligence, and false ego. And we all know our mind, which allows us to think, decide, and things like that. Desire, thoughts, everything is happening in the mind. Intelligence is power of discrimination. And the false ego is an interesting entity. The false ego is basically kind of forces the soul to think that I am this body. So the soul starts thinking, I'm not a soul and I'm this body. This false illusion is called the false ego. The false conception of the self is the false ego. And this is what kind of keeps the soul attached to this body.
So it's kind of like you have an outer garment and you have an inner garment. So when we go out to meet someone, we have an outer clothing, and that is considered compared to the gross body, which is made up of earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the 5 elements. And the subtle body are compared to our inner garments, our undergarments, right? And that is actually mind, intelligence, and false ego. The interesting thing is that both the subtle body and the gross body are actually matter. In the world sometimes, and in great philosophers even have actually thought that the mind is actually it, that the mind is actually not material. But the Bhagavad Gita actually comes in and says, no, even the mind is actually made up of matter, it is just made up of subtler matter.
Subtle means that we can't see it with our gross senses.
Right.
But we are still aware of our mind, right? Otherwise we won't be able to do anything.
So that is the mind, and then there is the intelligence, and then the intelligence, like you talk about the false ego. The intelligence is actually it's 3 aspects of the same subtle body. So the mind actually engages in taking all the impressions that are coming in through the gross body, and it also is the place where all our desires actually manifest. Desires and memories. The intelligence is actually like a parent, like a mother, and she actually oversees the mind and says, oh, my dear mind, either the intelligence is like a permissive parent, or she's like a discipline, like someone who wants to create discipline for the child. So depending on the intelligence might either go to the mind and say, oh, my dear little child, you really want this, don't you? And it doesn't matter whether what the mind wants is good or not, but the intelligence will facilitate and get that for the mind. And what we are doing through the process is actually trying to purify or sharpen the intelligence so that the intelligence can then control the mind. I guess there's a thing coming up. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And the distinction between these 2 bodies is that soul is not made of matter. The soul is made of Sat, Chit, Ananda. Those are the terms that is used in Sanskrit. Sat means eternity, Chit means knowledge, pure knowledge, and Ananda means spiritual bliss. So that is the nature of the soul. We don't see that because we are not aware, but we only see, we can only sense the body, the two types of bodies.
Actually, sometimes another question that people may ask is, okay, so if the soul is pure spirit, then what is it doing in this gross body? So what it's doing is it's been, tied. And what is tying the soul to this body? And you describe this as the false ego.
False ego.
The false ego is like a glue, a super glue that ties the soul to this conception of.
And the soul is kind of dragged around from one body to the other. So the soul is also described, as you can see in the left, like the body is a cage, and the soul is described as a bird inside the cage. And most of the time, we're just aware of the cage, not even aware of the body. And we just
Not
polish.
aware of the soul.
So yeah, not aware of the soul. We just polish the cage, we take care of the cage, but we forget to feed the bird. And this is what is happening to Arjuna. He's just worried about his cage.
He's just worried about the cage. And so and actually the whole modern culture is actually centered around taking care of the cage. See, when we talk about it in this way, it seems pretty obvious. But actually, if you think about it, our entire civilization is actually centered around like, okay, let's polish the cage as best as we can. Let's take care of the cage. And so now we have a highly polished cage. But we inside, the bird inside is actually crying for some food, and we're feeling isolated, malnourished, lonely. We are distressed. We have anxiety. We don't know whether what's going to happen to us, because the bird inside is actually completely neglected.
And so as C.S. Lewis said, you don't have a soul. We are actually a soul. The soul has a body.
The soul has a body.
So
this is one of our favorite.
This is from the Katha Upanishad. That really helped me to understand the relationship between soul, body, mind, senses. And as Krishna also described in the 3rd chapter, the hierarchy, that how the senses are higher than the dull matter, and the mind is higher than the senses, the intelligence is higher than the mind, and soul is higher than all of these. So here you can see the soul is basically riding this chariot of body. So this chariot, you can think of the chariot as a body, and it's just, the soul is kind of oblivious actually. The soul has kind of gone off into this stupor or sleep and not really aware of that I'm even riding.
It's kind of like if you can imagine, like in a big city like New York, somebody steps out of a bar completely drunk, gets into a cab and tells the cab driver, hey, just take me wherever you want.
Just take me home, and then forget. And the cab driver asks him, where is your home? And the soul is too sleepy to even answer that question. And the driver starts driving.
And so the passenger actually goes off to sleep in the back seat, and now the cab driver is completely on his own. So same thing here, the consciousness or the Atman is actually lying on this chariot, completely drunk, in a complete state of stupor. And this is the chariot driver.
And the stupor of false ego. That is the stupor of false ego. It forgets that I'm not the chariot. I am actually the soul.
And then there is the intelligence or the buddhi, who actually has the reins of the horses. Let's come from this way, actually. This will be easier to understand. So these 5 horses actually represent the 5 senses.
So the tongue, hand, or the sense of touch, sense of smell coming from the nose, sense of hearing coming from the ear, sense of sight coming from the eyes.
So those are the 5 horses. Now it stands to reason that these 5 horses are obviously very wild and reckless. And now these horses are actually connected. The reins actually are the mind.
So the senses are continuously driving. I want this. I want to taste this. I want to see this. I want to do this. I want to hear this. This is what is driving the whole civilization. It's such like a crazy situation.
Right.
Because it's completely driven by the senses.
It's driven by the senses. And then here is the mind, which is considered to be the reins. The reins. So what is the real function of the mind? The real function of the mind is actually to regulate the senses and to control the senses. And then the reins are actually in the hands of the intelligence, right? So now, if the mind actually does not engage in the act of controlling the senses,
but driven by the senses,
but rather driven by the senses, then the senses or these horses are going to drag the chariot wherever it wants, off the cliff, right? And if the intelligence is not purified, if the chariot driver doesn't really know the art of controlling the horses by holding the reins tight, then again, the horses are going to run amok.
Yeah.
So this is actually our condition. If we wonder why, we just go and do reckless things sometimes, or we engage in acts which we know are not so good for us, it's because the intelligence is not in its proper position. And most importantly, the Atman is in a state of sleep. So when the Atman wakes up, then he can direct the intelligence and say, hey, I don't want to go left. I want to go right. And then the intelligence will actually start acting in relationship to the Atman. And then the reins will be held and the senses or the horses will take us in whatever direction we want to go, rather than being dragged around.
So we are dragged around by our identities, our senses, our mind. Everything is actually dragging this chariot. So this is a beautiful video where again from one of the Mundaka Upanishad, where this song is sung by this queen to her crying son. She's saying, "Why are you crying?"
This is a newborn son, and we can see the glory of that ancient Vedic culture, where this is what a mother is telling her. This is a lullaby to her son.
शुद्धोऽसि बुद्धोऽसि निरञ्जनोऽसि संसारमाया परिवर्जितोऽसि संसारस्वप्नं त्यज्य मोहनिद्रां मदालसोल्लापनुवाच पुत्रम् शुद्धोऽसि रेतात्तनतेऽस्ति नाम कृतं हि ते कल्पनयाधुनैव पञ्चात्मकं देहमिदं न तेऽस्ति नैवास्य त्वं रोदिषि कस्य हेतुः.
Because it's a very beautiful song. Actually, we can maybe post this on our
it will be part of
please do
the
watch this, the whole thing, because she goes on and she says that, you're not, I'm not your mother, and I'm not, all these relations, this is not reality, so it's very, very beautiful.
So this is another key concept that Krishna talks about in the 13th chapter we read, that what is consciousness? There's a great debate about what is consciousness and where does it come from? Does it come from the brain? Does it come from the mind? What is the origin? And Krishna describes that consciousness is beyond the mind and the body, because the mind and body are incapable of producing consciousness. Consciousness is actually a symptom of the soul. And wherever you see consciousness, that means there is a soul, because there is no other way to create consciousness.
Just like whenever we see sunlight, sometimes, there's a cloudy day and you don't really get to see the sun, but there's still light outside. Whenever there is light, then one knows that the sun is out in the sky and it's not nighttime, right? So same way, wherever we see consciousness, there is a soul. Sometimes people think, do animals have a soul? And we'll see how even plants and trees and everything that is living.
Yeah. Life means consciousness, right? That's the definition of life. So anything that is alive needs to have consciousness, and that means there needs to be a soul.
So how it is that anything so remarkable as a state of consciousness comes about as a result of irritating nervous tissue is just as unaccountable as the appearance of the jinn when Aladdin rubbed his lamp in the story.
Thomas Huxley was a contemporary of Charles Darwin, and this was his conclusion, that consciousness cannot be, it's something out of this world actually.
Yeah.
And it is amazing.
And it is amazing. And it's something that we can play around with consciousness, but we don't have any way of actually creating the simplest, expression of that consciousness in the lab.
Yeah, we can create a camera that responds. Now there is AI, artificial intelligence and all that. We can do all of that, but still a camera, no matter how advanced the technology is, the camera can never be conscious, or a machine can never be conscious. It can only respond to instructions or learn from some things, but it cannot. So this is another point about like the different levels of consciousness that we have. Krishna talks about this in greater detail in other Bhakti texts, but we just wanted to present that how the soul is kind of emitting consciousness. Just like a bulb in the room emits light and fills up the body. The soul is emitting consciousness, and the soul has pure consciousness. So people may ask, okay, why is my consciousness not pure? Why is my consciousness disturbed? Because just like a bulb, if you cover the bulb with black paper or some other colored paper, then the light coming out from the bulb will be affected. But the original light is never affected. It's just the covering that is affecting the light that is coming out. Similarly, our consciousness gets affected by this covering of the subtle body and the gross body. And as a result, we go through different levels of consciousness while living.
So, generally speaking, it is described that our consciousness exists in 3 different realms. So we see that when we are sort of awake, right, we're going through the day and we are living our life. That consciousness, when it is routed this consciousness, when it's routed through the material body, through the five senses, then that's the awakened, sort of awakened, not in like the spiritual sense, but awakened as in like our daytime consciousness. That's called Jagrati. And then there is the nighttime consciousness, where we are fast asleep, the gross body is suspended, we are lying on the bed. When we are in that dreaming condition, we are not even aware that I am Loka, I am Vidarbha, whatever. I forget all that. I forget that I have a home. And then I enter into this world of dreams. And so that world of dream, that when consciousness is routing through the subtle realm, that is called the swapna, or a dreaming consciousness. And at that point, we are still, the subtle body is still active, but the gross body is inactive.
Yeah, so that's a good way to see that how the awake consciousness, both the gross body and subtle body are active. At the dreaming consciousness, only the subtle body is active. And there is a third level of consciousness called Sushupti, which means the consciousness is not routed, the original consciousness of the soul is not routed either through the subtle body or through the mind, through the gross body. It's just like a stage where we get a complete dreamless sleep.
And one of our favorite things, right? When I get a good night's sleep, when I've had a completely dreamless sleep, you feel so happy.
Yeah.
But here is something that is really, really amazing, which really hit me really hard when I first heard this example, is that even when I have a dreamless sleep, which means that my mind and my mind and my intelligence are suspended. My gross body is suspended, right? And I have this like few hours of totally dreamless sleep. I wake up and I say, I had a really good sleep. So what?
I had a dreamless sleep.
I had a dreamless sleep. So who is the observer there? Who is the person who is observing, even though the gross body is suspended, the subtle body is suspended, and yet beyond the gross body and the subtle body, there is still an observer who was able to observe
and experience
that sleep.
And remember that.
And remember that sleep.
So that memory is definitely not coming from the body or the mind. Normally, the mind has a memory. All our memories, experiences are stored in the mind. But this memory of having this dreamless sleep is not coming from the mind. So who's that? And that is the proof of presence of the soul. So these are the three levels of consciousness directed towards the material realm. But then the original consciousness of the soul is meant to be directed in the opposite direction, which is called the spiritual realm. And that consciousness is called Turiya. And when we direct our consciousness in that direction, then we are in our original state of consciousness. Because that's where the consciousness is supposed to be directed towards God, towards the spiritual realm. And when we act in that consciousness, then you'll see the experience of our experience of this world will be completely different. Because now we are acting, and this is what Krishna is trying to help Arjuna to get to the spiritual consciousness, so that he can make the right choice.
By the way, all of this is a lot of information or knowledge. We do have a Q&A/tutorial, like more smaller group, and if you still need more help, then just let us know.
And then also like we are conducting these daily meditation sessions, so you can drop into those daily meditation sessions and ask your questions from the presentation itself. That provides you another opportunity to ask the questions.
So here is, as we mentioned, that anything which is life actually has consciousness, has a soul. And so, there was actually an Indian scientist by the name of Jagdish Chandra Bose who actually did an experiment to show that how plants even respond to stimuli and they have life. And so here we have this German forester, Peter Holden, I think. So I don't know how you pronounce his last name, but anyways, he actually has been doing a lot of research in the field of like trees and forest, and he's seen that actually trees communicate and they have a society, they have a community, and they are actually sentient beings who actually, if a tree is sick, then another tree will actually respond by providing nourishment.
All the trees come together and send special nourishment to that sick tree through a system of roots, interconnected roots, and special.
They have their own. They have their own web, World Wide Web.
World Wide Web underneath the ground, and that tree sent special sugar and all these extra goodies are being sent to that tree. Anyways, you can read that article. We'll have the link.
And also, I think there was another point which I found really amazing, that if one tree dies, then the tree adjacent to it also grieves.
So again, that just proves that soul has consciousness.
And that life is everywhere.
Life is everywhere.
And life is amazing, when we see
Yeah.
life in all of these different forms, the trees. That also, it's all of this knowledge is also deeply connected to environment, environmentalism. Is when we see the sacred, first of all, when we see life, and then we see the sacredness of life, then we will think 10 times before violating any life.
And then that gives us real reason why I should preserve life.
Yeah.
Or why species should not be extinct, because every life form is amazing.
It's amazing and it's sacred.
Yeah.
And then here
Like
is
Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, in the 2nd chapter, that one of the qualities of the soul, it is sarvagataha, which means it is present everywhere.
always used to stump me.
Yeah.
Like I was like life is everywhere. Like, does it mean that life and the Vedas do talk about life on fiery planets and stuff? And it's like, wow, how does that even happen? And so here, the scientists.
Yeah, that this was an article in the Times magazine where they found the scientists reported finding life in volcanic rocks deep within the ground, and one could never imagine how can life exist there, because the soul can exist. The soul is not affected by fire. The soul can exist in any situation of matter, and that just shows that how we can see life can be present in any situation. Just 1 second. We'll show you. So Krishna says that soul is deathless. There's no. So we just found this to be interesting. How so when we're showing death count
Right now,
but this is again just the death of the
I have a
body.
feeling that after Corona and all the war that is going on right now, maybe this death count does probably respond to that, right?
Its average is out.
Averages.
So we talked about how the soul is different from the body, but yet this illusion is so strong that the soul thinks that I am this body. But what is causing this? What is causing this illusion?
So, it's interesting. Again, an analogy that really helps to understand this is like a person that goes to watch a movie. And, an indication of a good movie is when it's made in such an expert way that you sit down to watch the movie and you get lost in the characters on the project, on the screen. And immediately you start identifying with it. And whatever happens to those characters, then one thinks it's happening to me. And so you see people crying in a movie or getting angry or whatever, and grieving in a movie and stuff. So in the same way, we've also entered into the theater of this world. And just like in a movie theater actually has to be dark for the movie to be actually seen. So this world is also compared to like a dark place. And that's why we need a sun and we need light bulbs and stuff to lighten it, right? So this is actually, and so then we sit down and then we have to kind of see this projection. So just like this whole material existence is actually like a projection. It's a reflection. The Bhagavad Gita speaks about how this entire material world is a reflection, upside down reflection. And then we sit down and what we start doing is we start identifying with those characters on the screen. So I start believing I am a mother, I am a father, I am an American, I am a this, I'm a that, whatever labels. And then whatever happens to those labels, I start thinking it's happening to me. And so this is actually, there is, we'll talk about this later, but there is something called Maya. And she facilitates this entire movie theater for us. And we come and we sit here and we get lost and we think and whatever, we just get absorbed in this reflection without realizing that actually nothing is happening to the person sitting on that chair watching that movie. That observer is always untouched by stuff happening on that projection.
As soon as the lights come on in the theater, right, all that illusion disappears. So this is what Krishna is telling Arjuna, that hey, you have a strong illusion. This is my grandfather, this is my teacher, this is my brother, and all that. You're just like in a movie theater. So wake up from the movie theater and recognize who you truly are and what is your dharma. So we'll just talk about a little bit. So we talked about soul, that how soul is who we really are and it's different from the body. But hey, people don't believe in, a lot of people don't believe in the soul. Scientists definitely don't believe in soul because it is not something.
Well, I don't know about that now, and more. I guess we'll look into that.
Many scientists don't believe because
Yeah.
it is not something that they can measure
Right.
with their instruments or we can see with our eyes. So we're just trying to project some common sense evidences that point towards the presence of the soul. Of course, there is no like
Direct
physical evidence. So this is a very common sense evidence that when we ask ourselves, where is your hand, where is your leg, then we point to the different parts of our body. But if we ask, where are you, then we point towards our chest. That is just our chest, which means the way we respond to these questions kind of indicates that there is something beyond this body.
We don't say I hand, we say my hand.
My hand.
So who is the owner of that hand?
Yeah.
Right.
So when people die, then family members and friends and relatives, they gather together and we cry about that person, grieve about that person. But the body is right there. The person who's gone is right there. So who's actually gone? The question to ask is who's gone? Why are we grieving? Who are we grieving for?
So the person who's gone, we never really saw.
Yeah.
Because the person that we saw is still lying there.
So that indicates we have an intuitive understanding that something has gone, right?
Mhm.
And that means that there is something beyond this body, which is the soul. And this is another big one that even now doctors and scientists are forced to reckon with, that there's something beyond this body. And especially it comes from near-death experiences, which are documented by many physicians and doctors. And this is one such doctor, Dr. Sam Purāṇa of NYU Hospital.
At any rate, so this particular study is the largest study ever carried out in the world. It was done in 15 medical centers across the US and in Europe. And we studied more than 2,000 people who'd gone through this cardiac arrest or process of death. And we did not expect people to have any consciousness or awareness. But intriguingly, up to 40% of people came back and had a perception of being aware of what was happening to them, even though they had technically gone beyond the threshold of death.
Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot to it. I should also add that among that group, 10% had a very deep, profound mystical experience that was very true to them. But interestingly, 2% actually had full awareness, could describe all the events that were going on that were validated. So of course the question is, why does that happen? And we don't have the answers, because to our scientific model, when people have died, there should be no more conscious awareness going on. But it sounds like maybe consciousness is able to continue. And by that, I don't mean that they're awake, but that entity that makes us who we are, makes Sam who he is, makes Rena who she is, the self, the mind, seems to continue and doesn't become annihilated after a person has
Right
gone
out
through
of the
their process of
Bhagavad
death.
Yeah.
Self.
And this is another example, another doctor, Alan Hamilton, Harvard graduate. He describes this very interesting experience he had once had. There's so many.
Dr. Alan Hamilton, Harvard-educated brain surgeon, has seen it all.
I've been a brain surgeon for 25 years, and during the course of my career, I've had some experiences that are truly astounding. Things that medical science says shouldn't be possible.
In his new book, The Scalpel and the Soul, Alan reveals his extraordinary experiences. One of those cases involved a woman who underwent a special procedure that literally made her brain dead during surgery.
One of the most memorable was a young woman who had a blood vessel that had ruptured at the base of her brain. It's a very difficult area to get to. So one of the strategies that we had come up with was to put this woman onto a heart-lung bypass pump that would take over breathing and heartbeat for her, and then gradually cool her body down. And then when the time was right, her heart would stop and we'd turn the pump off. And then for a period of about 20
Sake of time, yeah.
Yeah, what he describes is this lady, she's completely cut off and her everything is frozen. And they do the surgery, and while the surgery is going on, there's a discussion between the nurses, and she's talking about getting engaged and the name of the jewelry store where she bought the ring, and then the person bought the ring, and all those details. And when they resuscitate her and bring her back to life, then this girl is able to describe everything in great detail, even down to the name of the jewelry store. And this completely stumped Dr. Hamilton, because how could she even hear or remember all these details? So his conclusion was there's something beyond the brain and the mind. And he says this kind of things happen regularly throughout every day, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he says that at the end.
Wow.
Another one, Dr. Michael Sabong, he has done great studies, many studies, kind of proving the same thing, that people come back and report things that was impossible for them to remember.
And then there is,
right.
So there's past life memories, which sometimes, gets tossed as just, hearsay, or we don't really know what to make of it. But there is actually, there was a professor, Dr. Ian Stevenson from University of Virginia. And he actually took it upon himself to do this amazing research, which spanned like, I don't know how many years.
3-4 decades.
3-4 decades.
And it's still continuing after he has left.
Right, he's still continuing, where he actually, wanted to take all of these, stories of children remembering their past life and put it through rigorous academic testing, right? Just to make sure something that would kind of fit the benchmark for rigorous research. And then, and then he came to the, conclusion that actually, reincarnation, these kids actually were remembering. It wasn't something that was concocted. It wasn't something they were just cooking up, but the evidences were really, really like pointing to the fact that there was something that they remembered, something that they actually had past life experiences from past life.
Something that carried over from the past life to this life.
And this is a really amazing,
This is ABC reporting the story of this young boy who's remembering his life from a World War II fighter.
Now we move on to our series on the paranormal. 3 out of 4 Americans believe in some kind of paranormal activity. But what about reincarnation, being reborn in the body of another? Half of Americans believe, half do not. And if you're one of these skeptics, try to explain how a little boy could know specific details about a fighter pilot who lost his life more than 60 years ago. It's a story you have to see to believe.
Okay, this is really tough. I need somebody to help me.
All right, I'm the volunteer. What do you want me to do?
Okay, I'm just gonna climb this thing and you have to hold me in case I fall.
Done. This is James Leiniger at 6, all boy and all spirit. This is a special plane. It goes in reverse. You don't see a lot of that. James knows a lot about planes, especially war planes.
What kind of airplane is that?
It's a Corsair.
His parents, Andrea and Bruce Leiniger, say from an early age, James would play with nothing else.
He was obsessed with airplanes. If you look around the house, that's all you'll see. Airplanes, helicopters, aircraft carriers.
But then, when he was 2, the planes James loved suddenly began to give him frequent and frightening nightmares.
I'd wake him up and he'd be screaming and he'd always be laying on his back, kicking his feet up at the ceiling. And I'd say, "Baby, what were you dreaming about?" And he'd say, "Airplane crash on fire, little man can't get out."
They sound like typical kiddie nightmares, but Andrea says they went on the same way for months. Maybe too much TV. But James was just 2, and his parents say only watching Barney and Teletubbies.
Teletubbies!
And Andrea and Bruce say they weren't watching World War II documentaries or conversing about military history.
This is an F-18?
No, that one.
So what explains the nightmares and James's strange obsession with airplanes?
I talked to my mom about it a lot of times. My mom had said maybe he's remembering a past life.
What did you say?
Politely, baloney.
But as time went by, Andrea didn't know what to believe. Here's James at age 3 going over a plane as if he's doing a pre-flight check. He would continue to say and do things that were puzzling, like the time his mom bought him a toy airplane.
And I said, "Oh, look, there's a bomb on the bottom of it." He said, "That's not a bomb, Mama, that's a drop tank."
A drop tank?
I'd never heard of a drop tank. I didn't know what a drop tank was.
His parents say between the ages of 2 and 4, James would reveal extraordinary details about the life of a former fighter pilot, James M. Houston Jr., mostly at bedtime when he was drowsy.
Bruce said, "What happened to your plane?" He said, "It crashed on fire." And Bruce said, "Why did your airplane crash?" And he said, "It got shot." And Bruce said, "Well, who shot your plane?" And I'll never forget the look on his face. He went, "Oh, the Japanese."
So what do you believe now about your son James?
I believe that he had a past life. I believe that in his past life he was James M. Houston Jr. And he came back because he wasn't finished with something. And that's essentially what I believe.
And he's not the only one. This is Ann Barron, the sister of pilot James Houston. She has met the Leiningers and can come up with only one plausible explanation for James's past life memories.
The child was so convincing and coming up with all these things that there's no way in the world he could know unless there is a spiritual thing.
Today, James is 8 years old and finally free from the painful memories of James Houston Jr.'s death.
Video where they actually show how, you know, they actually take him to that place, and the father does research, and he finds out that actually such a person actually did exist, and he actually had a friend along, and they both died in that same air crash. So there's a lot of details that are missing in this, you know, because, but yeah, you can shorten it, but you can, you know.
So this was Ian Stevenson's his conclusion was that it suggests that there is another evolution that is going on, because evolution is another theory. It's evolution of the consciousness. So these are some of the qualities of the soul, because Krishna talks about them at different points of the Bhagavad Gita. It's good to know that the soul is eternal, is always there. Nothing can touch it. It's never born. There's not a starting point of the soul, and neither it will die.
This is very important. The soul is made up of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. So it's made up of love, actually. You know, and it's made up, it never dies. That means it's eternal, and it also has full knowledge. So all this knowledge that we're learning is actually already part of the soul. We're just trying to remember it again.
And that soul is a tiny part of God. We are a tiny sample of God.
But we are not God.
We are not God. We are a tiny sample. So we have the same tiny amount of free will, tiny amount of freedom, tiny amount of desire to do things, desire to enjoy happiness. All that is actually coming from being a part of God. And therefore, we are always connected. We're always in connection with God. But we have kind of forgotten that. And that's what this knowledge helps us to remember that and realize that.
And each soul is individual. So it's not like, you know, at the time of liberation, we all merge and we become, you know, without any individual attributes. We, you know, this is the process of bhakti, and the process of the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita honors individuality, honors the unique attributes of each person, and honors the uniqueness that each person brings to a relationship, because they cannot be bhakti without individuality. And, you know, and so we don't want to remove our differences. We want to celebrate those differences. We want to experience a unification of the heart through those differences. So it's not about becoming one or becoming this homogeneous mass of oneness, but the preservation of all of those unique attributes, because spirit is with variety. It is not without variety.
So it's about finding unity and diversity rather than making everybody the same. And this is a very important one, that we can see that everything around us has form. So therefore, we think that the soul doesn't have a form, or so anything spiritual or subtle cannot have form. But not according to the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna says the soul is an individual and it has a spiritual form. We cannot see that because right now we don't have the eyes to see that. But our real self has a spiritual form, full of personality, full of qualities like love and compassion and kindness, and all those qualities are actually coming from the soul. So therefore, just like when we and rather actually the reason the matter gets formed is from the soul. So when we have a piece of cloth which is all crumpled up, it doesn't have a form. But as soon as we wear that shirt or pant, then the shirt or pant gets the form, because our body has form. So similarly, the reason we get a form, our body gets a form, is because the soul has a form. It's not the other way around.
And then we talked about reincarnation, that soul changes bodies during lifetime and in death. Soul never mixes with matter or is detected by it. And we talked about this also. It's stuck in our body through false ego. So false ego is the...
Yeah, and then what is reincarnation? We already
have time to take this on.
Yeah, we have half an hour.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, we're doing really well. So why don't we take a quick pause here, because we've been talking for such a long time.
I think we're almost done.
Almost done? Okay.
So we talked about what is reincarnation. Is basically change of body, and how the soul is going from one body to the next, and it's actually happening even in this.
Yes, and then she says that, you know, just changing bodies, like changing clothes. And once we know that this death is nothing but a change of clothes, we become fearless. We start identifying with them. We say, this is me. And then when the clothes are changed, actually Krishna says, nobody grieves in the clothes state. Like at night when we change our clothes, in the morning when we put away our own clothes and there is a pair of clothes, it's right about it.
Yeah.
So, Krishna is telling Arjuna the same thing, that it's just a change of clothes.
So what causes reincarnation? The primary driving force behind reincarnation is our actions and desires. Whatever we act in this life, whatever kind of desires we form, and that basically takes us to the kind of body we will get in the next life. And so somebody wants to sleep a lot, that's their consciousness. And then the nature says, okay, in the next life, I'm just giving a very gross example that, okay, you become a polar bear and just sleep for a long time.
So it's not a punishment. Yeah. Actually, getting all these different bodies is nature's way of facilitating our fantasies and our desires. Our desires are, so desire can actually, that's another thing about the soul. The soul is full of desires. The being sentient means having desires. A piece of stone doesn't have desire, but a soul, a person has desires. And so when our desires get routed through the gross body or the world of matter, then the soul wants to express itself and enjoy itself through the world of matter. And that's why we get frustrated. It's not desires per se that is a cause of frustration. It's desires routed through the world of matter. That is the soul.
And accepting the desires of the mind. So there are two places where desires happen. It's the original place of desire is the soul. But then when the soul kind of goes into the sleep, stupor and gives the power of attorney to the mind that, okay, you decide everything for me. From now on, your desires are my desires, and whatever you sign, I'll accept that. So then the mind takes over, and the mind is like a false place of desires where all these material desires form. And because the soul has kind of given up to the mind, so therefore, whatever desires happen, they basically carry us. Even in this life, our desires drive us from one place to the next, right? I want to go here, I want to live there, I want to do this kind of job, I want to marry this person. Those are desires that is driving the desires of the mind. And that same desires take us to the next life.
And the actions or the karma is your bank balance. So I may desire that I want to be Bill Gates in my next life. Good, well and good. But then do I have enough karmic bank balance to actually fulfill those desires? So between the karma and our desire, the two come together, and when the two actually fit together well, and our desires match with our bank balance, then we get the body we want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's given to us like that. So Krishna says in the 8th chapter that our consciousness at the time of death determine what body we'll get in the next life. Because we can't fake our consciousness, especially at the time of death. What is most important to us, like if our house catches fire, then the first thing we'll do is grab the most valuable thing. It could be our passport, it could be our baby, or whatever it is. We just grab that and just run out of the house. Similarly, when we are dying, that time the body is on fire, and our consciousness grabs what is most dear to it, and that basically kind of determines what body will go.
And so the whole process of bhakti yoga is really to train our consciousness, to train our awareness in such a way that at the time of our deepest crisis, our consciousness, instead of trying to hold on to this and that, actually I have a friend whose mother is actually very ill. And, even the family members are now thinking that it's better, she makes the passage because it's just causing so much suffering in her body. And she was telling me that it's because she's clutching on so tight. She's not letting go of this material realm. And I was also reading another poem by this other person who saw his mother, finally leave her body. And he said that the reason why she would not leave her body, even though there was no reason for her to stay in the body, was because she was just holding on, and she wasn't willing to let go. So I guess the point is that everything that we are doing in this life is actually to prepare ourselves so that at the time of leaving our body, we are not holding on to, things that don't matter, the non-essentials.
Yeah.
But we can hold on to the essential self and be able to make the transition without any fear.
And that's how nature actually works in our favor. Like throughout the life, we keep on experiencing different losses, right? One loss after another. And then we see, why is it happening? But it is kind of preparing us for the final loss of this body. And if we train our consciousness, then we take advantage of every loss, every crisis. Okay, yeah, this is what, and then we train our consciousness so that we can come out on the brighter side.
So this is a very important point.
Yeah.
So at the time of death, what gets left behind is the gross body. But the subtle body, as long as we are still not liberated and we are still going through the cycle of birth and death, the subtle body actually travels, or the soul rather travels with the subtle body. which means that it takes that coverage. So the mind that I have today is the same mind I've had for countless lifetimes. And that's why people can remember their past life.
And people, we hear of prodigies who can, at the age of 2 or 3, they can solve perfect math problems or write music or do this and that great things, because or people are scared of height or dogs or water or whatever. We carry so many phobias from, and where are they coming from? Even if somebody has not experienced that in their present life, those phobias carry over, because it is the mind, the same mind that is carrying, and it's carrying those memories, those fears, and it's been transported.
It's a whole baggage. We are, we are not traveling light.
No, we are traveling
on this passage. We are we're carrying these huge baggage, and that's what's determining. And that's why two babies, twins, born together, same time, same biological parents, may have completely different set of desires and personalities.
Yeah, because the mind is different.
The mind is
it's the same mind they're carrying from previous life. So this is another important concept, that who's kind of making it happen, and it's the super soul. We'll discuss more about that in one of our later presentations. But super soul is basically God within us, who's accompanying the soul. So we have there are two travelers in this body. One is the soul, and the other is the super soul, and who's observing everything that we are doing, and who's making our journey happen, who's driving this body, who's helping us move from one body to the other. It's all happening under, because the soul has no capacity to decide. If he had that choice, then okay, nobody would want a difficult situation in their next life, right? We try to create the best situation for us, but that is not in our control. The control lies in the hand of super soul, who based on our actions and desires gives us the next body. So what is the original nature of the soul? The original nature of the soul,
the dharma of the soul.
The dharma of the soul is love and service. This is so inherent. We can see this in this video.
Even in animals, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, we see that actually what drives us in this world is this taste for taste, right? Or it's called rasa. And we engage in acts of love. Of course, that love is misdirected sometimes, but everyone wants to experience. Everyone wants love, right?
Yeah.
To love and to be loved.
This is a really exciting moment for me. Here is Wunda, and she nearly died, but thanks to Rebecca, she came back from the dead almost.
So this is the nature of the soul, is to love and serve God and everything connected with God.
And when we are not aligned with this essential dharma,
yeah,
that's when we find ourselves out of balance, right? So the whole process of bhakti is to find or to reconnect with this nature of ours, which is love and service. So, and we'll talk more about this as we go along. Oh.
So at the end of the session, we discussed case of too many identities, the identity crisis, which happens because we are not sure of who we are. And we talked about, am I the body or the mind or something else? Sometimes we mix ourselves with the body. Sometimes we think I'm the mind. It's always mixed. So Krishna says how we are not this body, we are not this mind, we are something beyond this body and mind or intelligence, which is the self. We talked about 3 types of self. And then we talked about common sense evidences of the soul, one coming from our, when we point to ourselves, we have an intuitive understanding that I'm not this body. When somebody dies, then we have an intuitive understanding that the dead body is not the person, who is somebody else who has left from that body. And then we talked about near-death experiences, how different doctors, they experience this on a day-to-day basis. We talked about past life memories, how that points to something beyond this body that carries over from one life to the next. We talked about the qualities or characteristics of a soul. What is the soul? What it is not. different. Soul is an individual, soul is eternal. It was never born, never dies. It's full of spiritual desires. It is a sentient. The consciousness is a symptom of the soul. Then we talked about reincarnation. What is reincarnation? Reincarnation is actually happening even in this body. We are changing bodies even in this life. So we are, in a sense, the soul is taking on new bodies even in this life. So it is reincarnating even in this life. What to speak of going from this body to the next. So that's, and then our next session is coming up, which is a big part of Bhagavad Gita is minding your mind. Krishna speaks a lot about what is the mind, how to make, because mind is actually what is driving us in everything that we do. The power of the mind, how to deal with the mind, different enemies of the mind, and we'll conclude with lust. So that's coming up next. So we'll stop here. We've blabbered a lot.
I know we have, my goodness.
So
maybe we can, Aditi, do you want to maybe, how should we do it? If you guys, should we just go through the comments and questions?
There are some really awesome questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So one of the first questions I have here is with regard to the false ego, why is the word false needed? Isn't the ego essentially false?
What a great question.
That's a great question. So ego means conception of the self. And so there is nothing wrong with ego when it is a properly situated. So our true ego is that I am an eternal part of God. I am a spirit soul.
Aham Brahmasmi.
Aham Brahmasmi, that I am spirit. That is true ego. But when the soul starts thinking that I am this body, I am this mind, I am Indian, I am old, I am American, I am this, I am that, that is false ego. So therefore the word false is needed because true ego is good. And that we want to go back to our true ego. Generally, we think ego is bad because we only know false ego.
And actually, sometimes spirituality is seen in that way, that, perfection in spiritual life means complete annihilation of any ego. But the self cannot be annihilated. And if the self cannot be annihilated, then the identity of that self also cannot be annihilated. And real ego is nothing but the identity of the real self. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, whoever asked.
So in Sanskrit, the word is aham. And what is my true sense of aham means I. What is my true sense of I?
Who is the real I?
Who is the real I?
And that the real I is the real ego.
Yeah.
So we don't want to commit, spiritual suicide.
Yeah.
Which means we don't want to do away with the I.
Just because this is another example, Prabhupada gives that if the eye has cataract, we don't pluck out the eye and throw away the eye, right? We just remove the cataract. So similarly, from the false ego, we just remove the false part, which is the cataract. We keep the actual eye, which is the real ego.
Which is the observer.
Yeah.
The person who can love, the person who can serve, the person who has qualities, beautiful qualities of love, kindness, and ultimately that spark, which is part of God and has a very deep eternal relationship with God.
So does that make sense? Who asked that question? Oh, it's okay. Whoever asked that question, if that is satisfying to you.
Or if you have any further question on that, yeah, feel free to. All right,
We'll go to the next one.
There are a few questions here about the subtle body. So are feelings or emotions also considered part of the subtle body? Or are the mind and emotions part of the material body?
Very good question again. Feelings, emotions, thoughts, memories. There are two places they come from. In our conditioned state, which means when I'm not spiritually aware, the thoughts, memories, desires, all those, they come from the mind. And the primary intake of them is our senses. We experience something in the world, and that creates, and those are deposited in the mind. So the mind is like a tank that just keeps collecting all these experiences that the senses are sending it. And then it starts extrapolating them and desiring them. So that gives rise to desires and thoughts and this and that. That is coming from the mind. But the soul is a complete being. So the soul also has desires, thoughts, and preferences and things like that. But they are all suppressed right now. We don't hear the desire of the soul. We don't hear the thoughts of the soul. Sometimes we get a peek into the soul. So it's very hard for us to distinguish what is the desire of the mind versus what is the desire of the soul. And that is a process of spiritual realization. when a person becomes spiritually realized, then the desires of the soul, the thoughts of the soul, the emotions of the soul is full of emotions, but those are all spiritual emotions, and they predominate or they take over the desires of the mind, or the thoughts of the mind. And the mind becomes a follower of the soul. So now the mind also becomes filled with the same, the mind starts reflecting the desires of the soul. And we talked about it in our meditation session. The mind is like a mirror, and right now it's all covered with dust. So it does not reflect the desires and emotions of the soul. But when the mirror is cleansed, then the mind becomes a transparent reflector of the desires of the soul.
And by the way, the mind is also a material body. I think if you could repeat that question, I thought I understood it a little bit differently.
Okay.
Like, could you just repeat that question one more time, Aditi?
Yes. Are feelings or emotions also considered part of the subtle body? It's the first part. Second part, or are the mind and emotions part of the material body?
Yeah, they are. They are part of the material body because the mind is also material, right? So if they're generated in the mind and they're and depending, of course, on what that desire is. If the desire is for connecting with the soul, then that's a spiritual desire.
So right now, like you guys signed up for the course, you wanted to learn about the self, you learn about the Bhagavad Gita. Where is that desire coming from? That desire is actually coming from the soul. But then there is another desire that may come up in our mind, hey, let me do something else. So that desire is coming. So our selves are so kind of, right now they are mixed together. It's hard for us to identify whether it's coming from the mind or coming from the soul. But the proof is something that is coming, taking us towards our spiritual nature. Those desires and emotions, they are coming from the soul.
Go ahead, Aditi.
This one is really a really meaningful question. So since I'm a soul, not really the body, how do I react when someone is angry at me?
If I'm not, I'm sorry, I think it's been a long, can you repeat that question again? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Since I'm a soul and not really the body, how do I react when someone is angry at me?
And as such, I was just reading this chapter yesterday from the Bhagavad Purāṇa. It's the song of the Avanti Brahmana, and where he actually comes to this place of realizing that he's not this body, and he's being insulted because he used to be quite an obnoxious person. He made a lot of enemies, and then he decides to become a spiritualist. And hey, those people didn't forget all the crazy things he had done to them. So they would actually really go all out on him, insult him, neglect him, do all kinds of nasty things to him. And then he has this beautiful song that he starts to sing, and he basically says that actually I have nothing to do with any of this. I am just I the self is completely separate. So whatever is actually happening to the, at most what people can do is they can harm my body, but they can actually never touch me because I'm seated within this body. And this is actually what makes a spiritualist completely immune, and completely, it fortifies us, because we see that such great personalities, they're able to forgive and they're able to accept, radical acceptance.
Like Jesus Christ, he was put on the cross, but he's begging for forgiveness for the people who put him on the cross.
And the reason is because there's no identification, and then actually one of our great teachers in our Bhakti line, he says that when faults in others delude you or bother you, pause and introspect. No one can harm you if you don't harm yourself, which means that actually no one has the power to harm us ultimately, in the ultimate sense. And all we have to do is reclaim ourselves, reclaim our spiritual identity. Then we become, we become untouched.
Yeah, and I guess anger is such a basic emotion of the mind, and we'll talk more about that in our next session and following session. But I guess this whole basic understanding of it, I'm not this body, I'm a spirit soul. And the person who's angry at me, they are also reacting from discovering of this material body. And when we don't react to that anger, when we respond to that anger, when we process that, and maybe at that moment we may get agitated and respond in a harsh way, whatever. But with this knowledge and this connection, what will happen is we start taking ownership of what is our role in that whole situation, and also responding with kindness, responding with forgiveness. That becomes our default response, but it comes gradually. It's not going to happen just immediately, but we start training ourselves, letting the real emotion of the soul come out. And we also start seeing the pain of the other person.
Actually, there's a nice incident that I don't know, for me that this incident was very impactful. It was an incident with with our teacher, Prabhupada, and somebody came to him and complained that, did you know, Prabhupada, that in your movement there is racism? And Prabhupada responded by saying that if they think that they are this body and they treat you badly, then they are in illusion. But if you take that offense and you feel bad and you think that you are this body and that's why you're being insulted, then you are in illusion. So both the giver of the insult and as well as we don't have to receive it. In fact, just yesterday I read another really nice story of Buddha, where there was a person who was insulting Buddha. And he was speaking and this person was going like, you are this, you're that, what makes you? And Buddha was not taking offense at all. And so the disciple asked Buddha, like, why are you not taking offense? He said, well, he was giving me something. Now it's up to me whether I'm going to take it or not.
But having said all of that, we are people of emotions. So spiritual knowledge or spiritual life means processing those emotions to the best of our ability and continuing with our journey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That helps.
Next one.
If plants have a soul, why does one need to be vegetarian? Is there a hierarchy of souls?
Great questions.
Yes. Yeah, plants are, and bhakti basically means not being a vegetarian, but it means living a life of as little violence as possible. And also, because we are living in this world is full of life, and this is how it has been created. So we live a life of minimal violence, which is reducing the violence and pain in others. And at the same time, this is another aspect of bhakti, which is going to come up in the fourth or fifth session, is the yoga of food. And where we explore how we connect our eating as an act of spiritual offering. And by doing that, we, of course, we eat plants, but even we try to minimize the violence to the plants also as much as possible.
We'll talk about karma, and we'll talk about, like you said, the yoga of food, and then it'll become more clear. But yes, it goes beyond vegetarianism. It's beyond, it's actually spiritual eating, which is a yogic form of eating, where the food is cooked in a certain consciousness. And I think that there was a very nice point in that question, which means are there gradations? So yes, even plants have life. And so even, if you kill a plant and eat it, there is some karma there. And so we'll talk about all of that later. But the point is that there is still a gradation. And, plants, the consciousness is more covered. And so the experience of pain in a plant is less than that of certain animals who actually shed tears when their little ones are dragged away to the slaughterhouses, right? So there is a whole gradation of consciousness, that it's the same consciousness, but it is being reflected in different bodies and different levels of awareness. So in a plant, the consciousness is more covered over, and so the emotions and the experience of pain is different versus in an animal. And so that's one reason. But even that is not good enough for a practitioner of bhakti, not just to be a vegetarian. We want to go beyond that. And that we will talk about in our fourth session.
Yeah. Next one.
I think this might be the last one. And then,
Okay. So karma is an aspect of the ongoing soul. Does that mean dharma is just for this body and this incarnation? Or are they both projects of the soul?
Karma is connected to the body. Karma means the actions that the body commits or does. But the same actions, when they are done under the direction of the soul, the same act, they are no longer karma. We'll talk about that in our fourth session, which is on karma. The same acts, going to work, raising our family, doing things that we need to do in this world, they can be done purely from a material conception. Then all those actions become karma, and they give us a reaction that we have to endure. But the same actions, when are done under spiritual consciousness, they become a karma or spiritual activities, and they add to our spiritual journey and progress. So we'll talk more about it, but yeah, that's the difference between karma and dharma. It's just doing everything from a consciousness.
I had an idea that a lot of these questions, if you can save them and we can address them in the Q&A,
Yeah.
but I think we should also take a maybe next few moments to just maybe hear some reflections.
Yeah.
I think that'll be really nice because we've been talking for too long. Now we want to hear something.
Yeah. What touched you? What made you smile?
Reflection is anything that you heard that
Yeah.
you want to share back with the group.
I really loved the chariot of the body illustration. And I could just so see the way that my senses are often like wild horses, just taking me there. And so that visualization was really sweet, and to see the reins on the horses like gives me something to meditate on in that. So that was really, I loved that.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
We love that too. Thank you. Anybody else?
Hi.
Hi, Melissa.
The bird in the cage and polishing of the cage. It's interesting. I've kind of heard that analogy before, and like it never really hit me in the same. Like I was like, oh, it just for some reason today, a lot of things were just very clear to me. So thank you.
Thank you. By the way, somebody asked this question about the yoga food. We are actually going to be sharing a recipe on our Instagram page today. We're going to make a protein-packed vegan scrambled egg recipe with moonbeams. So, you might want to check that out. Yeah, go ahead with the reflection. I just thought of that.
Well, this is Nancy, and I wanted to thank you. The biggest thing that really impacted me, besides what everybody else said, was to live a life of minimal violence. It really hit my soul. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Nancy. Where are you from?
I live in Washington State, up close to Mount Rainier. So people think it's near Seattle, but it's not. I'm about 20 miles into the mountains.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Many people from Washington.
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, Dorian, go ahead.
One thing that was profound to me was there's an ongoing process of loss that's going on. So what really hit me while you were speaking was, it was like, what are you holding on to? Like all the different situations you get stuck in, and you're not realizing that something is going away from you. So you just need to let it go so that you can continue your journey, So that was really profound to me, the loss, just having to be okay with loss.
Beautiful.
That's beautiful. Our whole life goes in loss management.
Thank you.
Arch, if you have any thoughts, love your beautiful smile and your beard.
Can't hear you, but yeah. Anybody else have any other reflection before we wind up? Yes, Cheryl.
Unmute. I just particularly liked the concept that our body, that we're constantly getting new bodies anyway. A lot of belief systems have a big no on the concept of reincarnation. And yet our bodies are actually changing all the time. So I think that'll be a helpful way to address the question when it comes up with other people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, our body is like a river, actually. Our journey is like a river, right? River always, if you stand at the shore, the river is never the same at a point, right? So our body is never the same.
mind and body, everything is changing. And I guess it also allows for a life of fearlessness.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that is, this knowledge actually helps us. And, of course, it helps us spiritually, but even in a material sense, our relationship with the other will completely change, because now there is no other. We are all, whatever differences we see, are so superficial to our real identity, whether it's a difference of language or gender or race or whatever, religion. Actually, in our essence, we're actually, we are the same.
We are the same. And other thing is that how much God loves me, he also loves the other person as much.
Yeah.
Right. So there's, how can I hate or not like the other person, although they may be so obnoxious or whatever they are, but God loves that person equally.
And in our constitution, actually, the forefathers actually, they foresaw that, and they said all men are created equal. So that equality that we want is actually at the level of the soul. At the level of the body, there might be differences.
There will be differences.
But at the level of the soul, we're actually all equal.
So rather than trying to make everybody equal on the bodily level, it should be the other way. We recognize the equality at the soul level, and then the differences will not matter.
Then we can celebrate the differences.
Yeah.
So, should we?
One last one.
Okay.
It's so hard to part ways with you guys, so just keep greedy listening.
Yeah, if there's any one last reflection or comment, and then we can stop. And we'll save all these questions and comments and reflections, right, Aditi? And in our next Q&A, actually, I feel, here's what I think, that because one Q&A is not enough to address so many of these questions, why don't we start also tackling these questions in our meditation?
That's what I was saying, that we can tackle these questions in our meditation sessions.
Yeah, and then of course, a Q&A also, we can come together. So that way we can,
So the next Q&A will be this Sunday. I think it's 10 a.m. Eastern, and depending on where you are. And we do the meditation sessions every day at 9 a.m. Eastern. So please join that, and you can ask your questions there as well. And please.
Thank you for all your loving comments. This is very, your feedback actually is very helpful for us. So thank you. Thank you for your loving words.
And all the recordings will be posted on Mighty Networks. Is there anybody here who is not able to